All right, today's Daf Yomi is sponsored by our monthly sponsor, Divi and Tila Catcher, B'schus Refuah Shlema for Ephraim ben Shifra. We began our new parak, fifth parak of Sanhedrin, Daf Mem Amud Aleph, right at the top. Hayid Bodkin Oson B'Sheva Chakiros. They would check the witnesses. Mem Amud Aleph, very top. So check the witnesses with 7 what we call B'Sheva Chakiros. These are investigative questions, and the purpose of these 7 questions is in order to be able to determine a precise time and place that the witnesses claim the event occurs. And that's because we have a understanding that if witnesses cannot be brought to trial for being Edom Zomimim, meaning that they are lying about their testimony, and that specifically other witnesses saw these witnesses at another location at that same time, so then that is testimony that cannot be admitted in the first place. So we have to establish clearly where the time and place of this allegation takes place before we even address what the allegation is, and we do that with the following 7 questions. Number 1, Be'ezah Shavua, which year during the Shemitah cycle did this event take place? Be'ezah Shana, what year did it take place in? Well, Be'ezah Shavua means which of the Shemitah cycles within the Yovel cycle, and then which year within that. Be'ezah Chodesh, what month? Bekama b'Chodesh, what day of the month? Be'ezah Yom, what day of the week? Be'ezah Sha'ah, what hour of the day? Be'ezah Makom, and in what place? Those are the 7 questions. Rabbi Yossi says that's only 3. Be'ezah Yom, just what day? Be'ezah Sha'ah, what time? Be'ezah Makom, what place? That's all that you need. Makirin Atem also. Then, following that, we ask them these questions just to verify that what is actually what they're witnessing is in fact a crime that's punishable by death. We ask them, do you recognize who the person was who got killed? We're going to see that the Gemara is going to ask why we need to know that they recognize the person, but you have to know whether the person who was murdered was Jewish. Right? If he wasn't Jewish, then the crime is not punishable by death.
Do you let it rat someone out just for a mitzvah? So they can get punished?
You have a mitzvah, right? That's what we had last time. We told the witnesses you have a mitzvah to testify, and if the person's a wicked person, so it's actually a good thing that we eradicate the person.
How do you know if that person is Jewish other than that?
You mean that the person who was killed? Yeah. You'd have to recognize who he is, right? I knew the victim. If you knew the victim, then you knew that the person was Jewish, right? Just random guy, right. You wouldn't necessarily be aware.
What if you know him, but you thought he was Jewish, but really he wasn't Jewish? He was just
well, you couldn't tell by just looking at him, right? Just because the guy's wearing a yarmulke doesn't make him Jewish, right? Hisra Sembo, did you warn the murderer? And ha'oved avodah zara, if let's say the person was somebody who was worshiping avodah zara, so then as mi avad, what avodah zara did he specifically worship? Ubame avad, and how did he worship it? Right? Did he do a sacrifice? Did he bow to it? What was the method of what he did? Then we're going to follow up with investigative questions about the incident to be able to determine the circumstances around the situation. And if you ask more and more questions, that's great. Mai said there was a story. Badak ben Zakkai checked the witnesses. He even asked them, since the murder took place under a fig tree, were the fig stems thick or thin, right? Were they white or black? So then that was a question. Now, ma bein chakiros lebdikos, what are the differences between the types of questions, chakiros and bdikos? Chakiros, the first kinds of questions, exactly where it took place and when. So Omer Eni Yodeya, if the person says, I don't know, Edusan Betela, then the testimony is invalid, because then that means you can't make the Edom Zomim, because he said, I don't know when it took place or where it took place. Bedikos, but if it's talking about other circumstances in the case, Echad Omer Eni Yodea, if somebody says, I don't know, Vafilu Shnaim Omer Mein Anu Yodea, even if both of them say, I don't know the detail that you're asking me, Edusan Kayemas, the testimony can stand, as long as they don't contradict each other, right? If the witnesses contradict each other, then that's going to blow it, right? But if they don't know, that does not blow it. Echad chakiros v'echad bedikos, whether it's chakiros or bedikos, bisman shemachishin zeh, if there's a contradiction, edus and betela, then their testimony is nullified. Echad omer bishnayim b'chodesh v'echad omer b'shlosh b'chodesh. Let's say one person says that the murder took place on the second day of the month, one says it took place on the third day of the month. Edus and kayemes, that's okay, the testimony can still stand. Shazeh yodea b'ibur shachodesh v'zeh eno yodea b'iburo shachodesh. Because the mistake that they're making is one person realized there were 30 days in the last month, one person did not realize that there was only 29 days in the month, and so therefore they're off by their day in the calendar, right? So ze'omer b'shlosh v'ze'omer b'chamisha, if one says on the third and one says on the fifth, especially since we're testing them and they're going to both say the same day of the week, right? But if one says it's the third of the month, one says the fifth of the month, edus and betela, that's going to nullify their testimony. Echad omer b'shtei shos, if one person says it occurred 2 hours into the day, v'echad omer b'shalosh shos, 3 hours into the day, edus and kayemes, that's going to be okay, because we're going to presume that they can make a mistake in a few minutes, right? Because they didn't have watches, so they were judging by the sun. So being off,
and the moon.
well, not during the daytime, right? When the sun during the daytime. So you're going to judge during the daytime. You'll be able to know approximately, but you can make some mistakes. But if one says 3 and one says 5, that's going to nullify their testimony, because that large of a distinction people don't make a mistake on. Rabbi Yehuda says, no, people do make such a mistake. Kayemes, that's still going to stand as good testimony. But if one says 5 hours into the day, one says 7 hours into the day, that's going to nullify their testimony. Because there's a big difference. The 5th hour of the day, the sun's still in the east. 7 hours into after 6 hours of the day, the sun starts to set, goes the other direction. The sun is in the west. That you can't make a mistake on. Then, afterwards, we bring the second witness in. And we check him out. If their stories line up, then we start the case, and we have to open up with a statement of righteousness, as we said. That we say, if you're innocent, then you have nothing to worry about. That's what we say to the person, like we said in the last parak. One of the witnesses says, right? One of the witnesses says, I want to testify in his favor. Or one of the students says, I want to testify against him. So we stop him, right? Because we did not allow the witnesses to testify at all. Because it looks like the witnesses are just trying to get themselves off the hook. Because now that they've testified against a person, they realize that if they're found to be zomim, they're going to be liable to a death sentence themselves. So therefore, they might be trying to get the guy off in order to prevent themselves from getting into trouble. So therefore, we don't take.
It's a lose-lose situation.
So we're not going to accept the witnesses to testify anything. When it comes to the students who are there at the case, we said that we have to allow them only to say something that's positive, not something that's negative. If one of the students that are there, we said it's students, but they're really, advanced learners. These are the top judges that are there, right? I have something positive to say. I have something to defend him. Malin oso, then we bring him up, and we let him sit amongst the main judges. And he wouldn't sit down all day. He'd be able to be up there and argue that position. If he has a good point, he has something in what he's saying is correct, shomin lo, then we're going to listen to him. Even if the guy himself says, I have something I want to say to defend myself, shomin lo, then we can listen to what he has to say, as long as there's something reasonable for him to add in his case. If they do in fact find that he looks innocent, Patruhu, then we're going to dismiss the case and consider him to be innocent. V'im lav, but if not, ma'avir no solamachar, then we're going to wait till the next day. Umizdavgin zugo, so we're going to pair the judges up into pairs or groups. And they would go learn. They would go to the base medrash in order to go study, in order to be able to investigate the case, see what they can learn about the case, and argue it through. They would not eat so much, and they wouldn't drink wine the whole day, and they would argue the case all night long. The next day, mashkimin, they would get up in the morning, and they would come to Beis Din. When the person who was arguing on the side of innocent would be able to say, I was arguing innocent yesterday, and I still stand in my position. As we said, somebody who's arguing on the innocent side cannot switch sides. Or somebody who says that I'm arguing on the obligation side, ani mechayev, he would say, I was saying that he was chayev yesterday, I am going to stay in that side. If somebody was on the side of chova, somebody was arguing the side of guilt, he can switch and take the other side on in order to in order to get the guy off. Aval hamalamid zchus. If somebody was arguing already on the side to let the guy off, he cannot switch sides and argue the other way until, as we learned, he can vote differently. But up until the vote, he has to stick to what his argument was to allow the guy off. Tobed davar. Let's say they made a mistake. Shnei Sofre, let's say somebody made a mistake and couldn't remember what he was saying yesterday. So Shnei Sofre hadayanim azkirno. So we had the two court scribes that we talked about yesterday, and they would remind him, say, this was your opinion from yesterday. If then the second day they realized that everybody's arguing out, they decided that he's innocent, so then he's patur. But if not, then we get up and we are going to make a vote. If it goes 12 to quit and 11 to find him liable, zakai, then he is free. If it's 12 to obligate, and 11 to acquit, even if it's 11 to 11, and one is saying, I don't know, he is abstaining. On that matter, even if there's 22 that say mizaka, that say he's off the hook, in order to say he's obligated, and one says, I abstain, then now you're in trouble because only you have 22 judges who are voting. You need 23. So therefore, what do you do? Yosifu hadayan in all those cases, we're going to add judges. And how are we going to add judges? Shnayim, you're going to add 2 at a time, and then continue the process. You add 2, you would invite you. They have the argument. If we have the votes, if we don't have the votes, we argue it overnight, etc. Ad shivim ve'echad, until we get to a maximum number of 71 judges eventually. Shloshim v'shishim v'zakin v'shloshim v'chamishim v'chayvin. Let's say we get to the 71 number, and you've got 36 that say he's innocent and 35 that say he's obligated. Zakai, then he is free to go. Shloshim v'shishim v'chayvin. If 36 say he's obligated, shloshim v'chamishim v'zakin, and 35 say he's to quit. So donun elu keneged elu ad shir echad min ha'mechayvin divrei mezakin. Then they got to argue and argue and argue until they can figure out how to convince somebody one way or the other, right? So that goes back and that goes for a while. Says the Gemara, Minani Mili, where do I know this from that you're supposed to have 7 questions? So Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Damar Kra, Rav Yehuda says that there are 3 psukim. One pasuk is by the Ir Hanidachas, the city that worships Avodah Zarah, and it says by there in that pasuk, V'darashta v'chakarta v'sha'alta hetev. You should investigate, you should search it out, and you should ask very good, right? So that's 3 different things that you need to do. Darasha v'chakarta v'sha'alta hetev. 3 different things. Ve'omer, then it says also by somebody who worships Avodah Zarah. Ve'hu gad lecha, and it's told to you, v'shamata, and you heard about it, v'darashta hetev. V'darashta hetev, 2 more, right? You should investigate and you should do it well. Ve'omer, and then 3rd case, which is a case by Edim Zomamim, the Darshu Ashoftim Hetev, the judges should investigate the matter thoroughly. Darshu and Hetev, another 2 words. So, therefore, it's 3 words extra in the first pasuk, 2 words extra in the second, and 2 words extra in the third. Total of 7. 3 plus 2 plus 2 is 7. And so that's how you know there's 7 questions to ask. Okay, 1 second though. They're in 3 different sections of the Torah. So, ve'ema chada chada kedechsiva maybe means you're supposed to ask 3 probing questions, 3 questions about where it was and when it comes to Nir Nidachas, and 2 when it comes to Avodah Zarah, and 2 more when it comes to Edim Zomim. Why are you adding them all up together? We're on Mem Amud Beis on the top. So the answer is De'im Kain. If that was true, Lich Devinhu Rachmona Bechada, because if it was true that you're adding them all together, why doesn't the Torah put them all together in one place? So the answer is Kim Dekula Bahadadi Hadadi Ksiva Mehadadi Yalfi. Since all of them are talking about investigative questions regarding court cases, we know that all of them can be combined together into a rule of 7 extra questions to ask in court cases. Okay, so, and we're going to learn them from each other. We call that a binyan av, when you have when you have a rule stated in one place, so then we're going to apply that same rule to all similar cases. Since these are all court cases, so it stands to reason that if you have to ask extra questions in one case, you wouldn't need to state it in the other cases either. But now that it's written in all the different cases, we're going to combine the whole thing together, and we've got 7 extra words in 3 different places. So therefore, now we've got 7 questions. Now that you're going to learn all these 7 words from each other, it's all like it's written in one place. But the problem is that in order for it to be a binyan av, you need 3 cases that are very similar. And we don't have 3 cases that are similar. We have 3 cases that are very different, because irni dachas lahani tarti lo damya. And irni dachas, the case by the city that worships avodah zarah, is different than any of the other cases. Why? Shekain mamon and palat, because irni dachas, all of the money and property of everybody in the city gets destroyed. But when it comes to the other 2 cases, the Eid Zomim and a person who individually worships avodah zarah, their money survives. So therefore, it's not the same. So therefore, I can understand why I might need to ask questions in the other 2 cases, but I wouldn't have thought to ask so many questions when it comes to an irni dachas, because maybe I'm stricter on the irni dachas. Avodah zarah, lahanach tarti lo damya, and avodah zarah is different than the other cases. Why? Shekain b'sayif, because the other 2 cases, the Eid Zomimim, when they are testifying about a person who commits murder, or when we're talking about it in irni dachas, the type of misa that we give to them is with a sword. We kill them with a sword, which is a lower type of misa than what we would kill somebody who commits avodah zarah, which is with skila. So maybe I'm going to be stricter on the guy with skila and ask more questions there, but not as strict on the people who I'm going to kill with sayif. The irni dachas is the city that commits avodah zarah. Edom Zomim lahanach tarti lo damya. Edom Zomim is different than the other 2 cases. Why? Shekain tzrichim hasra, because all of other cases, in order to find them guilty, you need some kind of a warning, right? You can't warn witnesses because you don't even know they're committing the crime. They're coming to court and they're testifying. There's no warning involved. So therefore, maybe Edom Zomim is stricter than all of the other cases. So therefore, all of these 3 cases are really different in some kind of a way. How can I combine all of them together? So the answer is, you're right. It's not a binyan av. Rather, we're going to change our minds and we're going to use what's called a gzera shava. Gzera shava means I've got a word that is the same in all 3 instances, and based on the fact there's a word that is the same in all 3 instances, I'm going to establish that the rule in all 3 cases is the same. So behetev, hetev, yalfinon. We're going to learn it from the fact that it says the word hetev in all 3 places. Mehadadi, all from each other. Gzera shava mufna. And this is a gzera shava in which the word hetev is extra in all 3 places. Dilo mufna, which would be necessary, because if it wasn't extra in all 3 cases, ikal mefrach. So then I would be able to ask the same questions. Logically, these are 3 different types of cases, so therefore I wouldn't apply the same rules to all 3 cases. Therefore, having an extra word, which is in all 3 places, tells me that the law is the same regardless of their differences. So la'ayaf nuye mufni. So who says that these are extra? The word hetev is extra. So let's take a look, because after all, we counted the word hetev when we were listing the 7. We counted it each time. So the answer is, you're right. We counted it as one of the 7, but it really is extra in that a different word could have been used instead of the word hetev. The fact that the word hetev was used was intentional. So he says, midhava le'lemichtav v'darshu v'chakru. It should have written, for example, by irni dachas, it should have said, you should search and you should investigate. V'shani kro b'diburei behetev. Instead, the pasuk says the word hetev, shma mino lafnuye. That means that the word is extra. V'akasi mufna mitzad echadu. That still means it's only extra on one side. So bishlam hanach tarti mufnahu mishum dehavalei lemichtav. So I understand when it comes to Edom Zomim, and when it comes to the person who worships avodah zarah, it says v'darashta, and it doesn't say v'chakarta, it just says v'darashta hetev. So therefore the word v'chakarta is missing. It would have made more sense to say v'darashta v'chakarta. The fact that it says v'darashta hetev means the word hetev is used instead of v'chakarta, so the word hetev can be used for a gzera shava. El irni dachas may havalei lemiktav, but by irni dachas, in which the word v'darashta, v'chakarta, v'sha'alta hetev, it's all written there. So therefore, what was going to be written in order to add the extra 3rd word? So ha ksiva kuluhu has. So it's all 3 words are already written there. So hasam nami afnuye mufna. There, even in irni dachas, the word hetev is extra. Midahavale lemichtav, because the pasuk could have said darosh tidrosh o chakor tachkor. Could have used a double language, darosh tidrosh or chakor tach or chakor tachkor, v'shani kro b'diburei, the fact that the pasuk changes its language, behetev, in order to use the word hetev, shma mino lafnuye, is in order to tell me that you should use the word for a gzera shava. So now I've got a gzera shava that attaches all three of them, and now that I've got 3 extra words and 2 extra words and 2 extra words, I can combine them all together to give me a total of 7 extra words. There's my 7 questions. Now, how do we know about the death sentences of strangulation? Because none of the 3 cases are circumstances where you are going to strangle the person as for the crime they committed. One is, as we said, one is a death sentence of skila. The other 2 are death sentence of hereg with a sword. So the answer is kal v'chomer miniskolin umin hergin, because chenek, strangulation, is a lesser death sentence. If you have to check and investigate when you're going to give somebody skila or hereg, which is the higher level death sentences, then for sure
decapitation, whatever it is.
That's right. So then I'm going to for sure have to check when it comes to a more lenient death sentence. And even sreifa can come as a kal v'chomer from skila, because skila is more severe than the burning, than sreifa. So that's fine according to the Rabbanan, Damri skila chamura, that they are of the opinion that skila is the more severe of the death sentences. Elul Rabbi Shimon, but according to Rabbi Shimon, Damar sreifa chamura, he holds that sreifa is the more severe of the death sentences. Ma'ika lemeimar, then how are you going to do it? Because the most severe of the death sentences is sreifa. It's not listed.
If you're burning someone, it doesn't by burning.
Yes.
It should be a very slow and painful.
Correct.
Yeah,
So that's what Rabbi Shimon
seems.
seems.
Which could be worse than decapitation. Decapitation is very.
But the
quick
question is,
and
it worse than skila? Right. That's the question.
They're all the same outcome.
Yes,
So
but
what-
I guess the process is more painful.
Decapitation is quick death. Skila is burning and sword.
Oh,
Correct.
yeah. So wouldn't you say that's strong?
So that is a good point. So Ella, Amar of Yehuda. So if Yehuda says, I'll tell you how we learn it. We're not going to do it from a kal v'chomer. We're going to do like this. V'hinei emes nachon, v'hinei emes nachon. Okay, in 2 of these cases, it says the words v'hinei emes nachon, that it was found. After you investigate, we're going to find that it is truthful. Right? We say that by irni dachas, and we say that emes v'nachon by avodah zarah and by irni dachas. So we're finding, so that's 4 extra words. So actually we had 7. Now we have 2 extra in one place, 2 extra in another. So we actually have a total of 11 extra words. Okay.
Here, didn't you say we have 7?
Now we had 7. Now we've got 4 more. So
Where
now we're at
did the
11.
4 come from?
So, MS Nachon. MS Nachon was an extra in each of the 2 places. So what do we need 11 of them for? So Sheva l'Sheva Chakiros, 7 for the 7 questions. Dal plus Ligzera Shava. 3 of the word Heitevs are extra. Now we're saying those 3 words Heitev are extra specifically for the kal v'chomer. I mean for the Gzera Shava. So I've got 7 that aren't part of the Gzera Shava, 3 that are part of the Gzera Shava. That gives me 10. Pashalu Chada, that leaves 1 extra word. Rabbi Shimon, that's for Rabbi Shimon's drasha, Lasuyi Nisrafin, in order to tell me that it applies also to people who get sreifa. Okay, the Rabbanan. What about the Rabbanan? They don't need the extra pasuk for that because they could have learned it from a kal v'chomer. The answer is Milsadasi b'kal v'chomer tarach v'kasav leikra. We have a principle that sometimes things that you can learn in a kal v'chomer, the pasuk will go out of its way and say it anyway. So it's not really a problem. So the fact is we got an extra word, and it's going to tell me that this rule of drisha v'chira applies to sreifa cases. Okay, Megadeth ba Rabbi Avo. Rabbi Avo did not like this explanation. Ema lasuye shmona chakiros. If what you're saying is true, then why are you coming to include cases of sreifa and say that it's just repeating something from a kal v'chomer? Why not say that you need 8 chakiros? Right? I say there are 8 questions, right? 8 questions plus the 3 extra words for the Gzera Shava, and we should have 8 questions, not 7. Ushmona chakiros miyeka. Well, first problem is, can't think of an 8th question. Right? We had 7 questions. That kind of covered all our bases. What's your 8th questions? Alama lo, why not? I'll tell you another question. You could ask, you could ask how many minutes? Right? How many minutes during, or how many chalakim, right? How many parts of an hour? But Tanya Namiach, you have a brisa that says that also. How you both can also b'shmona chakiros. There is a brisa that says that we would check with 8 chakiros. So hani chala baye ali b'd Rabbi Meir damar inadam toa v'lo klum. So fine, asking how many minutes is fine according to Abaye, who explains Rabbi Meir that a person doesn't make any mistakes, right? Even as far as what time it is down to the minute. A person can look up the sky and know what time of day it is. They were pretty good at it.
Does that mean no one's perfect? How can people not make mistakes?
I say
No
that
one's
people
perfect.
people were used to knowing what time it was. When you didn't have a watch, you could look up at the sky and pretty much know. According to Rabbi Meir, people knew. And even according to the version that says people make a little bit of mistake, it's okay. But according to Abaye, according to Rabbi Yehuda, Damar Adam Toa Chatzi Shah, the person can make, even according to Rabbi Meir, he says a person can make a mistake up to a half hour. Ularava Damar To Inchi Tuva, that people make a long time. So Michael and Maimer, so then obviously that can't be the question you're asking for your Chakira. How many minutes? Because people make significant mistakes in time. So therefore they wouldn't be able to answer that question. The answer is we might be asking how many years in the Yovel cycle this took place in. Be'ez Shavua, Hainu Be'ez Shavua. We already said that was a question we already asked. Which of the Shemitah cycles was this during the Yovel cycle? Ella Lasuye Be'ez Yovel. The answer is, well, we could ask him which Yovel cycle, meaning this could have happened 50 years ago. So therefore, we're going to ask him which Yovel cycle it took place in. That could be an eighth question. Vidach Kevan Damar Be'ez Shavua Lo Boy Be'ez. The other one says, there's no point in asking that question. Once we know which year of the Yovel cycle, we can presume it's this Yovel cycle. Wouldn't necessarily be necessary to say it. Rabbi Yossi says, okay, so Rabbi Yossi says only three questions. Tanya, we heard in Bryce, Rabbi Yossi said to the Chachamim, L'divreichem, according to you, Misha Bava Amar Emesh Hargu, right? Somebody says, the day before yesterday, let's see, somebody comes along and says, yesterday somebody killed somebody. Omer lo be'eza shavua, you're going to start asking him, what year was it? I mean, the guy just kind of told you it happened yesterday, right?
Shavua means
or the
week.
day before, right? But shavua means which of the seven, shavua means a cycle of seven. So it applies to which of the Shemitah cycles, right? Be'ezel shana, we're going to ask him what year was it? Be'ezel chodesh, what month was it? Bekama b'chodesh, what day of the month? Amrulo, they said to him, Lidvarecha, according to you though, Misha Bav Amar Achshav Argu. Say somebody walks in and says, I just saw it happen right now. Omer lo be'eza yom, you're going to ask him what day? Be'eza show what time? He just said right now. Be'eza makom, what place? Ela afagav de lo tzarech ramin anlay. Rather, even if the question is not necessary, it seems unnecessary to ask the question, we do it anyway, because that's what's necessary. That's what you're supposed to do. So we ask the question, regardless of whether it's necessary. Kid Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, Shimon ben Elazar says, Hachinami afagav de lo tzarech ramin anlay. Kid Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. So too, we're going to say that we're going to ask the question even if it's unnecessary. Rabbi Yossi, Emesh Hargu Shchiach Berov Edius. So he says, well, that isn't the normal way. People don't walk into Basin and say the day before yesterday somebody killed somebody. That's not usually what happens. Therefore, that's why I'm telling you in the normal case.
You someone would kill someone, they don't tell them right the same day, right then and there.
Well,
Why wait the next day? Why wait for the next day?
Possibly you're not by a Basin, right? So it could be that you don't have the ability to come and testify until a few days later, a week later, 2 weeks later. So therefore, you have to be able to ask the question. So he says, Emesh, to come and say the day before yesterday, that is a typical way that somebody would come into court. But Achshav, to say it just happened right now, that's not the normal way, the testimony. It doesn't come in right now. Okay, Makir Matemo. So we asked the guy, do you know him? So what's the reason? Tanur Rabbanan Rabbi Makir Matemo. So do you know him? Nachri Harag Yisrael. Harag. Was it a non-Jew that was killed or a Jewish person that was killed? Hasri Simbo. Then we ask him, did you warn him? Kibel Alav Hasra. Did he receive the warning, right? You told him that he can't kill and he's going to get death sentence. Did he say, yes, I understand it? Hitir Atzmo Lemisa. So if he basically permitted himself to get the death sentence, he has to say, I heard you, I acknowledge your warning, and I'm doing it anyway. Hamis Betoch Dibor, did he kill? He has to kill immediately after the warning. Because we don't want him to get a warning and then 10 minutes later he kills somebody. We say, I forgot about the warning.
He wasn't scared to get killed.
Correct. That's what we're saying. Ha'oved avodah zarah. If somebody was worshiping avodah zarah as mi avad, we ask him, who did you worship? Le'peor avad, le'markulus avad. Did you worship Baal Peor? Did you worship Markulus? These are the different avodah zarahs they had. Ubemeh avad. How did you do it? Bezivuach. Did he slaughter an animal? Bekitor. Did he burn some incense? Benisuch. Did he pour some wine? Be'ashtach avad. Did he bow? Amar Ula minayin la'asra min Torah. Ula says, how do I know that the Torah requires that the witnesses warn the person? Shenamar, as the pasuk says, if somebody has relations with his sister, the daughter of his father or the daughter of his mother, and he sees her erva, so who cares if he sees? What difference does it make? Right? It could be dark. It doesn't matter. It's still usher. You have to show him the reason why it's usher. That's the warning. You have to be able to tell him, I'm going to show you where in the Torah it says it's usher and what your punishment will be. Now,
This is
before he commits the Avera.
So you're warning him.
And he still does it.
And he still does it. Ain't no Indian lakares. Now, the punishment for relation to your sister is kares, right? Which is spiritual punishment. God excommunicates you, lose your chelik and all of hava. So, but there's no death sentence on this world for it.
When you die, you're not going to be going to Gehenna. You're just going to be floating, basically.
Well, or your neshama ends, terminates, right? You don't go anywhere. So therefore, if that's the case, so then what do I need witnesses for? So therefore, what's the purpose of warning him? So the answer is it's not for that. It's we know that if somebody is chayav kares, we're going to learn that you can give them malchus, you can give them lashes, and by giving them lashes, no, but you're going to give them lashes, regular lashes can pater you from kares. That's why minhag in many places, I think Chabad does it, right? We give somebody lashes on for Yom Kippur. That's correct. So that way, in case you were chayav kares, right? You're getting lashes, and now you're not chayav kares.
Which means when neshama is free to go get.
That's correct.
Or whatever it is.
That's correct. That's a
I
kapara.
think it's a very rare scenario where you catch someone before they're about to commit an act, right? So
That's correct. And if you were trying to commit a murder, and then the guy's watching you, you would stop, right? So.
Or you learn how to disarm the weapon.
So it is very rare. We're going to see how very rare and unusual it was for somebody to actually get a death sentence.
Yeah.
So Tanei Inyan Malchus. So okay. So this case is for lashes, right? That a witness, somebody wants to give somebody lashes, you have to witness and give him a warning. In the yeshiva of Chizkiah, they had the following brisa: Vechi yazid ish arei ehu lehargo be'arama. If a person schemes to kill his friend through a plot. Shehosrubo, then you have to have you had to warn him, Vadain who mazin, and he's still doing it on purpose. How come? Because the pasuk says, V'chi yazid, he will, not he was planning, right? He was scheming, and then you came along and gave him a warning, now he's not scheming anymore. No, he has to.
He's threatening, right?
He's threatening to kill, and now you say, don't do it or else you're going to get a punishment, and he says, I'm going to do it anyway, and he carries through with his Avera. So you see that.
Are you allowed to kill him? Are you allowed to punish him before you get...
You cannot punish him before he does the Avera. You can stop him. Yeah, actually, I take that back. You can't. If you see somebody going to commit murder, you can kill him. Right? We're going to learn that later on.
Before he does it.
Yes. Debei Rabbi Yishmael, Tana, and Rabbi Yishiva Rabbi Yishmael, they had a brisa that learned like this. Ha-motzim oso mekoshesh eitzim. There was a fellow who was gathering wood in the desert, and they found him gathering wood.
How can you find wood in the desert?
That's a good question. There he was. He was doing it. So they must have had wood there, right? So I don't have been in the Sinai desert. There must be wood out there. So he was gathering wood, and he's called the wood gatherer, meaning that even though they told him you can't gather wood, he kept gathering. So therefore, he went right through the warning. He was warned, and he kept gathering. Debei Rebbe Tana and the Yeshiva Rebbe, they had the following brisa: Al davar sher ana al iske dibur. Right? He says he is going to get misa for sexually assaulting a woman, and it says al davar because of the words that he said, but there's no words involved, right? Al davar because of the action that he takes is how we translate it. But we're saying because of the words to indicate that the words, because of the words of warning that were issued to him before he committed the Aveira, that's why he's able to get a death sentence. So I have 4 different sources. Utzrich, I need all 4 sources. Because of Rachmanacho, so if it told me by the sister, Havamina Chayev Malkus, that would be only needing a warning when it comes to Malkus, when it comes to lashes. So in Chayev Misos Lo, but I wouldn't need a warning when it comes to giving somebody a death sentence. Because of Rachmana Ki Yazid, so the pasuk tells me the next case, which is the Ki Yazid, when a person is scheming to commit murder. Because of Rachmana V'Ki Yazid, if it was talking about a case where the person was scheming to commit murder, Havamina Mili Sayef, that was when the person's death sentence was going to be with Sayef with a sword, to kill, which is a lenient death sentence. Aval Skila, de Chamura, Imalo. But Skila, which was a more severe death sentence, I would say you don't need to warn him. So therefore, tzricha, I need all the cases. Now, the problem is the last 2 cases are both skila cases. V'tarti b'niskal and lamali. Why do I need 2 sources to tell me that I have to give warning by skila? So Rabbi Shimon, lasuyin nisrafin. So according to Rabbi Shimon, it's a name eno inyan, right? I don't need 2 by skila. So one tells me skila, and the other one tells me that it applies to sreifa, to burning cases, according to Rabbi Shimon as well. L'Rabbanan, according to the Rabbanan, I can also deal with that anyway. But milsa dasu b'kal v'chomer, even though I can learn it from a kal v'chomer from skila, tarach v'kasav leikra, the pasuk is going to write it anyway. V'lichtov rachmana b'niskalin v'leisu hanach v'limir minei. Why doesn't the Torah only write it once that you have to give warning by skila, and then I'll order kal v'chomer to the other cases? So hachanami milsa dasu b'kal v'chomer tarach v'kasav leikra. Yeah, you're right. You could have, but again, just because you could learn it from a kal v'chomer doesn't mean the pasuk isn't going to write it out anyway. So the pasuk sometimes writes out things that you could have learned out of logic anyway. Okay, next, hitaratzmo lemisva. We set lemisa. The person says he is acknowledging it and he's accepting the misa upon himself by going through with the killing or the crime despite being warned.
I don't care what I say. I'm going to do it, and I'm not scared to die.
That's exactly what he's saying. So minolon. So where do we know this? Amarava, Rabbi says, and some Chizkiya, Amarkrol, the pasuk says, you must hames. It says that the dead body shall be killed. What do you mean the dead body shall be killed? The person who should be killed, right? The person who
if he's dead, and have to kill dead body.
So the answer is lemisa. He considered himself dead already. He acknowledged that was he was going to get. He's dead man walking, and that's you kill the person because he already acknowledged himself. Amar Rav Chanan, Edi Naraha Ma'urasa. Let's say I have witnesses that testify about a woman who had erusin with a man, right? She's only been married, beginning of marriage, but they've never moved in together yet. So, and they testify that she had relations with another man. Okay, shehuzmu, but then those witnesses are made zomim. Ein neharogin. Those witnesses do not get killed, even though the punishment for adultery would be misa.
What's the point of why
so the Eidim Zomim don't get misa. Why not? Why? Because mitok sheyicholim lomar, because they can say the osra balabanu. We didn't come to kill her. That wasn't our intention. We only wanted to say she committed adultery, so she couldn't get married to that guy. We were just trying to prevent the marriage. We were trying to kill her. So v'ha asruba. Well, wait a second though. They warned her, right? They had to come and tell her that, right? They had to claim that they warned her, and therefore the warning would have been you're going to get killed. So therefore, it was clear that the intention was to get killed.
She cheated on the other man, basically.
Right. So delo asruba. The answer is they never claimed that they warned her. They just said, okay, we saw that she committed adultery, but we never warned her. So therefore, it was the only punishment is going to be that she can't get married. Ve'ilo asruba hechi mikdala. So if they're not going to be, if they didn't warn her, so then why was there ever going to be a case that she was going to get the death sentence, that we had a question in the first place that the Eidim Zomim would have gotten the death sentence? So the answer is Be'isha Chaveira. The answer is because she was a wise woman, right? She was a Torah scholar. She already knew the punishment. And Valiba the Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, this is according to Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, Titania.
She already knew. Why did she do it?
Because people do have errors anyway, even though they know the wrong things to do, right? That just happens. That's right. The times we're going to Bryce, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda says, Chaver, he is of the opinion that a Talmudic scholar, a Torah scholar, Ein Tzarech Hasra, he does not have to get warned. Because the whole reason why is Lefi Shelo Nisnei Hasra Ela Havkin Bin Shogeg Lemezid. The whole reason why you have a warning in the first place is so that you know the difference between somebody who's doing it through negligence or somebody who's doing it on purpose. V'kevan de'inhu lo miktali ihi hechi miktala. So therefore, but now the problem is like this, okay? So they're not getting the death sentence. That means that she can't get the death sentences. Why? Because Havyalah Eidashiyat Yachola Hazima. It becomes testimony that they can't be Eidim Zom, that they can't, because they can't be Eidim Zomim, because they're claiming that they never intended to kill her. So therefore, the testimony against her could never have been accepted either.
So what's her punishment?
What's her punishment? Her punishment would have been also, well, we were suggesting her punishment would be death anyway because she didn't need the warning, but now we're pointing out even that she couldn't get the death sentence for because the witnesses could never have been accepted as testimony. If it's testimony that you could not have brought them as Eidim Zomim, as this seems to be, Lo Shema Eidos, their testimony is no good, in which case, testimony is no good, why would she get a death sentence? So the answer is, Hachinami Kamar. No, that's correct. That's actually what we're saying. Mitok She'ein Nergin, since these two witnesses, they're claiming that they are not testifying, they never testified in order to have her killed, so they can't be killed. And as a result...
Isn't it their job to testify? The fact they're witnesses, they should testify that they saw it happen. Why are they not testifying about it?
These are Eidim Zomim, right? So they're not supposed to testify, right? Because they're false. Right? So these...
If it happened, they still can't.
So these are Eidim Zomim, so they come along and they're saying, we thought that we don't think that we deserve the death penalty because we never intended to kill her. We never warned her, right? And so therefore we're saying, and since they can't get killed because of the way they testified to prevent themselves from getting killed, because they can say, we only came in order to prohibit her against her husband, so too, right, if that was the testimony they gave, she also couldn't get killed. So if they came if two witnesses came to Beis Din and said, we only are testifying against her, we never warned her, we're only testifying against her to say that she committed adultery because that's going to prohibit her from her husband, she can't get the death sentence for that. Because it's it's witness testimony that cannot become Edom Zomim. Ella, so now, Be'isha Chavera de Kaimalon de Miktala, fine, but now we had the statement of Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda that a woman who is a Torah scholar doesn't need to be warned before she commits adultery for her to get a death sentence. Well, if she wasn't warned, and we're going to throw the witnesses out because their testimony is not valid, then how do we ever have a circumstance that she could get a death sentence for that? How does Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda work? Right? If she commits adultery, and the witnesses come in and say, yeah, but we never warned her, so she can't get the death sentence because the two witnesses, right, are protecting themselves by saying we never intended to kill her.
With any other witnesses besides these false witnesses?
So that's what we're going to need. We're going to need some other witnesses here. So the answer is Kesh is insa, v'chazrav is insa. So what happens is she commits adultery and then she commits a second time adultery. So therefore, so therefore, now the second testament, the second group, can't say the reason we came to testify was only in order to prohibit her and her husband, because she was already prohibited on her husband because she already committed adultery the first time. So why are they testifying the second time? Must be to get her killed. So therefore, they have no excuse to be able to say, we never intended to kill her. Of course you did. What will be the point of you coming? She's already prohibited to her husband. So the answer is no. The reason is because they were trying to prohibit her against the person who committed adultery allegedly with. Right, that was the intent. So shazinsa mibol rishon, right? Laosra bol sheni banu shazinsa mibol rishon, because she's already done the affair with the first boel, so therefore with the first guy. So now she's prohibited to that guy and to the husband. Now she has a relation with the second guy. So now she's going to get misa from that, and then inami, another circumstance could be shazinsa mikrove. So the answer is okay, fine. I said it wrong. The witnesses could say, okay, fine. We didn't intend to have her killed either. We were only trying to intend to have her prohibited to the second guy that she was allegedly with. And so therefore, again, we're stuck with Edis She'iyat Yachol Azima. She can't get killed for that either. So the answer to that is she had relations a second time with the same guy. And they're testifying about the same guy. So therefore, nobody knew was being prohibited here. The husband was already prohibited. That guy was already prohibited. This new testimony cannot be in order to prohibit her. It must be that the testimony was trying to get her killed. And so therefore, now the witnesses can get killed, and then she can get killed as well.
She only gets misa if she's warned before her?
Correct.
So
unless you're Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda, who says that she could be a chaver, she could be a Torah scholar who would otherwise know, but nobody agrees with that, right? Otherwise, we need to be able to warn her. Einami, or else shezinsa mikroveha, that she could, if she has relations with one of her relatives who are already prohibited to her, right? Let's say, right, a brother-in-law or something like that. So then that person's already prohibited to her. So there's nobody new being prohibited. Okay, so the question is, what is the difference? Why do we bring the case of a nara me'orasa rather than a regular married woman? So the answer is not karafilu nesua nami. It would be the same halacha even if it was a married woman, right? Same thing. So you're right. The answer is because the chiddush is that even though she never was actually married to this husband, we believe the witnesses to say that their intention was to prohibit her on her husband. right? The husband, even though she was never with him, right? Why would we want to separate? How would we be punishing him if we were taking away the wife that he was never married to? So the answer is no, it is a punishment, right? So that is something that they could be believed to say. Amar Rav Chisda. Rav Chisda says, somebody says that the murder took place with a sword. The other person says it took place with an axe. Hargu, Bariron Hargu, killed him with an axe. Ein zen nachon, that is not a proper testimony. There's a contradiction there, and therefore the testimony is thrown out. One says he was wearing black clothes, one says he was wearing white clothes. That is irrelevant detail, and the case stands. Meisvei, but we ask a question against that. Nachon, sheyeh nachon. It says the Torah says that you have to do the investigation. You have to find that the witnesses agree with each other. Echad omer b'sayif. One says with a sword, hargo, that he killed him. Echad omer ba'riron hargo. One says it was with an axe that he killed him. Echad omer b'kelev shchor. One says with black utensils. V'echad omer b'kelev levanim, or white.
Lead or black?
No, we're talking about his clothes, right? His clothing was black or white. Ein zed nachon, that is not valid testimony. 1 second, we just said it was valid testimony. How come we're saying now it's not? So Tirgum Rav Chisda. So Rav Chisda explained, Besudar shechan kobo. The answer is, this garment is the garment that he strangled him with, right? He committed murder, but it's relevant because it's the murder weapon, right? It's not the same thing as saying he was wearing a black t-shirt versus a white t-shirt. Now it's saying that the murder weapon was a white handkerchief versus a black handkerchief. That is relevant testimony, right? So it has to be substantial, relevant testimony. Dahainu saif ariron, which is the same thing as testifying about a sword versus an axe. Toshma, come and listen. Echad omer sandalov shchor v'echad omer sandalov levanim. One says he was wearing black shoes. One says he was wearing white shoes. Ein zed nachon, that is not valid testimony. So again, who cares what color his shoes were? The answer is hasam nami kigon shabbat bo b'sandalov hargo. The answer is they were the murder weapon. He killed him by kicking him, and so therefore, what color his shoes were very relevant. Toshma, come listen. Maisu badak but Ben Zakkai. There was a story, and Ben Zakkai in our Mishnah asked beuktzei te'ena about the stems of the figs. Well, how could stems of figs be relevant? Amar Rabbi Berchama explained, Kigon she'akat te'ena b'Shabbos. The answer is, the crime was he was picking figs on Shabbos. So therefore the stems of the figs were very relevant.
That's borer and
it's going to be Machal Shabbos. It's not going to be borer, it's going to be Ktsira, right? Kotzer, right? The Allah Kamikdal, right? The Allah Kamikdal, he's going to get death sentence for picking the figs. The Tanya, we learned in a brisa, Amru lo tachas te'ena hargu, but we have a brisa about this, that the case of Ben Zakkai was, the testimony was that he was killed under a fig tree. So if he's killed under a fig tree, then it's a murder case, not a Shabbos case. So El Amar Rabbi Berchama says, Kigon sheshaptu beyichur shel te'ena. The answer is the murder weapon was a branch from that fig tree. And so therefore it's very relevant to know details about that fig tree. Tashma, Amar lehen te'ena zu uktzadokin uktzeha gasen. Let's say he said to them that these stems were thick or these stems were thin. Te'enim shchoros, te'enim levonos. The figs were black or the figs were white. So El Amarav. So therefore that's the testimony, not the shoot of the murder weapon, the stick, but something very detailed about the fruit. So El Amarav Yosef mi Ben Zakkai losiv inish. So he says you're right. But Ben Zakkai, you can't ask a question on because Ben Zakkai has a different opinion in the Mishnah, and he holds that these questions even make the testimony contradictory. Even though everybody else says those are detailed questions, doesn't matter. Ben Zakkai apparently held those things did matter. Shani Ben Zakkai de bedikos kechakiros mashvile. He held that if you could trip the guy up into the details, that also would negate the testimony. Man Ben Zakkai. So the first question is, this is now finally Yehuda's question, who is this Ben Zakkai? Who is he? Right? Yeah. So, Lema Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, maybe it's Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. So, Mihava b'Sanhedrin, but how could he have been? He was never around in the Sanhedrin's time. So, therefore, this is a story that happened, that they were judging a murder case. It was during the Sanhedrin. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai didn't live during the Sanhedrin times. For that time, we're in a brisa. Kol shnosav shel Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai may have esrim shana. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai lived 120 years. Arbaim shana asak b'prakmatia. The first 40 years, he was in business. Mem shana lamad. Then he spent 40 years learning Torah. Arbaim shana limed. And then for 40 years, he became a Rebbe. The Tanya, we learned a brisa. Arbaim shana kodim churban habayis. The 40 years before the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, Galsa Sanhedrin, the Sanhedrin was exiled from their chamber, the Yashva La Bechanus, and they set in a different location called Chanus. V'amar Rabbi Yitzchak bar Avudimi, Rabbi Yitzchak bar Avudimi said, Lomar shelo dano dine knossos. They were not able to judge any fines anymore. Once they were no longer in the chamber of hewn stone, where the normal Sanhedrin was, they weren't able to judge those cases anymore. Dine knossos, what do you mean they couldn't judge fines? Why couldn't they judge fines? Elo shelo dano dine nefashos. They weren't able to judge capital cases anymore. They were outside of their area where they're supposed to be, so they couldn't judge capital cases anymore. Utnan, and we learned in a Mishnah, Mishachar of Beis Hamikdash, Hiskin Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, that once the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, then Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai established some rules, Zecher Lamikdash. So that means Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai lived following the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. He was only a Rebbe for 40 years. And we know that there were no cases of Dinei Nefashos for the last 40 years of the Beis Hamikdash. So how could Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai have ever been sitting on a Sanhedrin? It doesn't make sense. Ella ben Zakkai di Alma must be a different ben Zakkai, right? Different guy. So Achinami Mistaber makes sense also. The Isal Kodaitich Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, because it was Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, Karle Rabbi ben Zakkai, when we call Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, that's like, just his name was ben Zakkai. His name was Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. You don't shorten his name and call him a nickname, right? We had a story in this brisa that actually quotes it as Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was the one who did this investigation with the figs. The answer is, that was when Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was still a student, right? Remember, we said that for 40 years he was a Rebbe, but before that, for 40 years he was studying. So when he was a student, he was in the Beis Din, and he asked this question. That's what was happening. So for Amar Milsa, Umistavar Lahu Ta'ameh, he said this idea, and they felt that it was a correct point. So they called him up. We're on Mem Aleph Amud Beis, the Kavua Bishmei. So they established it in his name. Ki Hava Lamad ben Zakkai Hava Karele Ketalmid HaYoshev B'nei Rabba. When he was a student, so they called Ben Zakkai. They called him Ben Zakkai because he was a student. So they just called him by Ben Zakkai. Ki Hava Limed, when he became a Rebbe, so Hava Karele Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Then we gave him the title Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. So that's why he got elevated in his title, because he.
So Rabbi Yochanan used to be known
as when he was a kid, he was Ben Zakkai, right? He wasn't a kid. First 40 years he was in business, right? Then he was Mr. Zakkai, Mr. Ben Zakkai. After that point, he became Ben Zakkai, and then he became Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Ki Karele Ben Zakkai al Shem Dimikaro. In the Mishnah, when we call him Ben Zakkai, that's because that was his name at the time of the incident. Ki Karele Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai in the Brisa, which calls him Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai al Shem Dahashta, because that's how he became known as Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Maiso Badok. So they then did the investigations, and then we wanted to know what's the difference between chakiros and bedikos, and the answer is, if somebody says, I don't know, when it comes to the chakiros, those questions of when and where, so then the testimony is invalid. But if they ask him detailed questions about the case, like what kind of color shirt was the murderer wearing, and the person says, I don't know, then that doesn't invalidate that won't invalidate the case. So Maya Filu Shnaim Omrim. What does that mean? Even if two people say I don't know. Even if one person says I don't know, so then it's not a contradiction. So obviously if two people don't know the same question, so it's going to be fine. Pshita, it's this obvious thing. If one of them says I don't know, so obviously if two of them say I don't know the answer to that question, the testimonies can be valid. Amar Rav Sheshes a Reisha Kai. It's going on the first part. Right, the first part of Mishnah. This is how you read the Mishnah. Bechakiros, when it comes to the questions about when the crime took place and where the crime took place, afilu shnaim omrim yadanu. Even if two of them say we know, but there's a third witness, and the third witness says I don't know when it occurred. Edusin batelo, that's going to invalidate their testimony, right? Because Rabbi Akiva, this is like Rabbi Akiva's opinion. He says. Right, it says in the Torah, Al Pishnaim O Shlosha Edom Yokum Davar, that a testimony will be able to be followed based on 2 or 3 witnesses. Now, if it's based on 2 witnesses, it's followed obviously at 3. But his point is that 3 witnesses are like 2 witnesses, meaning that it can hurt your testimony too. If you've got 3 witnesses and one of them blows the testimony, so then the testimony can't be accepted from anybody because they're a group. So therefore, if one of the 3 witnesses, even if you have 2 witnesses that know the testimony well, but one of the witnesses does not, the third guy is going to blow the testimony for everybody. So Amar Rava, so Rava says, problem with your explanation, good explanation. Problem with explaining the Mishnah that way is, Va edus and kayemes ketani, the Mishnah says that their testimony is going to be valid, right? It says that if 2 of them, it's going to be valid. So you just explained it to me. Their testimony would be invalid. Ella Marava, the Rava says, Hachi Kamer. This is how you explain it. Afilu b'chakiros. When it comes to the chakiros, the questions of when and where, Shnaim Omrim Yadanu, if two of them say we know, Ve'echad Omer Ini Yodeh, one says I don't know, Edus and Kayemes, the testimony is going to stand. Keman, who is that like? Kilok Rabbi Kiva. That does not follow Rabbi Kiva. As we just said, Rabbi Kiva holds that's not valid. Other opinions, we're saying that as long as you have two witnesses, it is valid. Rav Kana and Rav Safra Tanu, Sanhedrin Bei Rabbah. Rav Kana and Rav Safra were learning Maseches Sanhedrin in the yeshiva of Rabbah. Pagabu Rami Bar Chama, they met Rami Bar Chama. Amar lo, he said to them, Mayim Risu Baba Sanhedrin de Bei Rabbah, tell me something great that they learned about Maseches Sanhedrin in yeshiva of Rabbah. Amri le, they said to him, Mayim Rinan Baba Sanhedrin, great saw. My koshalach, he says, well, what would be so hard? We don't know what kind of question you have. Tell me, what question do you have on Sanhedrin? We'll help you out. So Amarle, Meha Diktani, he says, I'll tell you what question I have. It says this Mishnah. Ma bein chakiros lebdikos. It says, what's the difference between chakiros and bdikos? Chakiros echad omer ini yodea. When it comes to the chakiros, if one says, I don't know, edusun betela, then the testimony is nullified. Bdikos, when it comes to bdikos, omer echad ini yodea, if somebody says, I don't know, v'afilu shnaim omrim ein ani yodimim, if two of them say, I don't know, edusun kayemes, then the testimony is going to stand. So michti, let's take a look at that. Idi v'idi doraisa hi, both drisha and chakira are both in the Torah. Right, you got to do these investigations. They're both Torah obligations. So Maishna Chakiros, Maishna Bedikos. What difference does it make whether you have Chakiros that the person says I don't know, or Bedikos that the person doesn't know? Why is one valid still and the other not? Samar Hachi Hashta. He says, why is that a question? Bechakiros Amar Echad Eni Yodea Edus and Betela. I'll tell you why. When it comes to the Chakiros, the when and where questions, the testimony is invalid. Why? Because by not answering those questions, you can't make these Edom Zomim because they're not testifying when it took place or where it took place. Bedikos. But when it comes to a detail of the court case, Amar Echad Mehan Ini Yodea, if somebody says, I don't know a particular detail, Edus and Kayemes, the testimony stands, because Edus Shata Yochel Azima, because you could still bring Edom Zomim against them. Amar Lahu, so he said to them, Ihachi Amrisu Batova, so he says, Amrisu Ba, he says, if that's what you learned, that's amazing. That's a great shot, and I like that answer. So Amrile, so they said to him, Mituva, say Demar, Amrinan Batuva, he says that because you treated us so respectfully, you asked a good, respectful question. So then you asked good. So that's why we're able to give you a good answer. Zihu say demar lo amrinan ba v'lo chad. If you would have treated us disrespectfully, you would have asked a bad question, and we wouldn't have been able to come up with giving you a good answer. It's a good place to stop. Shkuach.